Ella, you need to give your apartment to Amy. My father's voice was calm, matter of fact, like he wasn't asking me to hand over the one thing I'd worked my entire adult life for, but simply stating something as obvious as the weather. I blinked. For a second, I was sure I misheard him. Excuse me? My voice came out sharp, cutting through the suffocating silence of my father's living room. Across from me, Sharon, my beloved stepmother, sat perched in her usual spot, her legs crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, expectant smile. Amy, my half-sister, sprawled lazily on the couch, thumbs flying over her phone screen, not even pretending to care about this conversation. You heard me. My father folded his hands together, his tone heavy with disappointment. He starts college in the fall. She needs a place to stay close to campus. Your apartment is perfect. I let out a short, humorless laugh. They were serious. They were actually serious. Give her my apartment? I repeated slowly, as if testing the words out loud might help me process the absolute insanity of what was happening. Yes, Sharon chimed in, her voice laced with that tone. The one I knew too well, the one that had been drilling into my skull since I was 9 years old. Condescending, dismissive, Amy deserves it more than you do. That was the moment something in me snapped. For 20 years, I had swallowed their insults, their favoritism, their outright neglect. I had played the quiet, obedient daughter, the one who understood, the one who never asked for too much. But this was the final straw. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I had worked 6 years, 6 long, brutal years to afford that apartment. Late nights, missed vacations, saying no to everything that wasn't rent, food, or the tiniest luxuries I allowed myself maybe once a month. I had scraped and saved and sacrificed because I knew that no one, not my father, not Sharon, not anyone was going to give me anything for free. And yet here they were, sitting across from me, acting like I should gladly hand over the only thing I had ever truly owned. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Then I looked my father dead in the eyes and said, no. My name is Ella, I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how I finally stood up to the family that never really wanted me. I wasn't always this way. I used to crave my father's approval, desperately, painfully, but that was a long time ago. See, my mother died when I was 9, cancer, the kind that sneaks up on you, steals the strongest person you know, and leaves you standing in the wreckage of what used to be your family. For a little while, it was just me and my dad. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but we were a team. We had our routines. Saturday morning pancakes, movie nights, the way he always kissed the top of my head before I went to bed. And then she arrived, Sharon. I remember the first time I met her, my father had been smiling, actually smiling, for the first time since Mom died. He introduced her like it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Ella, this is Sharon. She wore a sleek black dress, her blonde hair styled just right. When she bent down to my level, her perfume was overwhelming, suffocating. And the first words she ever said to me, "You should really tuck your shirt in, sweetheart, you look messy." I was 9 years old. A year later, Amy was born, and just like that, I became invisible. At first, I tried. God, I tried. I followed all the new rules, spoke quieter, I stayed out of the way. I let Amy have whatever she wanted because she's just a baby, Ella. Be a good big sister. But no matter how much I shrunk myself, it was never enough. Sharon never liked me, that was obvious. But what hurt more? My father let it happen. He let her treat me like an afterthought, like a burden. The older I got, the worse it became. Amy got everything. New clothes, the latest toys, extravagant birthday parties. Me, I got whatever was left over, if that. Family vacations? Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come. Christmas morning, Amy sat in a mountain of gifts while I unwrapped a single envelope with a $20 bill inside. Buy yourself something nice, Dad would say, barely looking up. By the time I was 16, I stopped expecting anything from them. By the time I was 18, I was counting the days until I could leave. College was my escape. I applied to schools as far away as possible and never looked back. My father barely noticed I was gone. He was too busy with his real family. I scraped by on scholarships, student loans, and whatever hours I could pick up at a coffee shop near campus. And when I graduated, I came back. Only because I had landed a job offer I couldn't refuse. I had assumed I would crash at my father's house while I got on my feet. After all, I was his daughter, right? Wrong. Sharon had answered the phone, her voice syrupy sweet. "Oh, honey, we gave your room to Amy. She needed more space. I'm sure you understand." My father had said nothing. I slept on a friend's couch for a few months. Then I rented the cheapest apartment I could find. It wasn't much, just a tiny box with peeling walls. But it was mine. And I swore to myself, never again. Never again would I let them make me feel small. Never again would I depend on them for anything. So I worked and worked and worked. 6 years of saving every penny, living like a monk, skipping vacations, saying no to nights out, eating the same cheap meals over and over. And then my grandmother died. She was my mother's mother, the only person who had ever truly cared about me. And in her will, she left me $150,000. It was everything. That money, combined with my years of savings, was my ticket to finally having something of my own. When I found the 2-bedroom apartment, I knew it was perfect. Not too big, not too small, just right. And the best part? No mortgage. When I signed those papers and took the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe, secure, free. But now my father and Sharon were sitting across from me, acting like I owed them something, acting like I should just hand it over, like I was still that desperate little girl waiting for their approval. Like I was still the Ella they could walk all over. But I wasn't, not anymore. I met my father's gaze and repeated slowly, deliberately, no. And just like that, everything changed. The words still lingered in the air. No. I could see the way my father recoiled at it, like I had slapped him across the face. Like my refusal, my audacity, was somehow more offensive than his actual demand. Sharon's carefully crafted mask of politeness was cracking, her fingers digging into the armrest of her chair. Amy's expression had shifted too, no longer indifferent now. There was something else, something smug, like she knew, like they all knew. They had another card to play, and they did. My father straightened, his voice cooling into something distant, something almost businesslike. "If you don't give your apartment to Amy, you'll be cut out of the will." And there it was, the final ultimatum, the last move in their pathetic power play. I let out a breath, slow and controlled. Once upon a time, that sentence would have terrified me. Once I might have flinched. But now it just made me angry. Because I finally saw it for what it was, a leash. A chain they had been dangling over my head for years, keeping me tethered to them, making sure I always knew my place. But what they didn't understand, what they had never understood, was that I stopped needing them a long time ago. I had never truly belonged in this family, and I knew exactly when it started. I used to think losing my mom was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I was wrong. The worst thing that happened was realizing I lost my father too. I was 9 years old when my mom died. 9 when I watched my dad stand at her funeral, his face blank, his hands clenched so tightly I thought they might break. I clung to him after she was gone, hoping that if I stayed close enough, if I was good enough, he wouldn't disappear too. And for a little while, he didn't. For a little while, it was just me and him. Grief sat between us like an uninvited guest, but at least we were still a we. Then came Sharon, and suddenly I wasn't part of the equation anymore. She moved into our house with her neat little suitcase and her air of quiet authority, and before I even had time to understand what was happening, she was everywhere. Reorganizing the kitchen, rearranging furniture, making decisions, big ones, like which family traditions stayed and which ones were too difficult to continue without Mom. I vanished in the process. At first it was subtle, the way my dad's goodnight kisses became hurried, distracted, the way he started missing our Saturday morning pancakes because Sharon wanted to sleep in, the way he started calling me kiddo less and Ella more. Then Amy was born, and there was nothing subtle about it anymore. It was like a light switch flipped. Like overnight, I became excess weight. I remember standing in the hospital room, peering over the edge of the bassinet at the tiny, wrinkled thing inside. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" my father said, his voice full of something I hadn't heard in a long time, something I wanted to believe was still reserved for me. But it wasn't. Because when I looked up, he wasn't even looking at me. He hadn't been for a long time. I didn't realize it right away, of course. Kids never do. They don't notice the slow fade, the way love doesn't just vanish, but bleeds out gradually, seeping into the cracks before disappearing completely. I didn't notice how many family outings suddenly didn't include me, how the Christmas gifts got smaller each year, how birthday parties became afterthoughts. I did notice Sharon's rules. Ella, keep your voice down. Ella, don't make a mess in the kitchen. Ella, stop pestering your father. At first I followed them. I thought if I was good enough, if I tried hard enough, she'd like me, that he'd notice me again. But it didn't matter. Because there were different rules for Amy. Amy who could scream and laugh and dance through the house without consequence. Amy who could spill juice on the carpet and be met with soft reassurances instead of sharp reprimands. Amy who could do no wrong. Amy who got everything. I started seeing it everywhere. New clothes, Amy got them first. Family vacations, planned around Amy's schedule. Movie nights, only if Amy picked the film. I was the extra. The leftover, the inconvenience. I tried to ignore it. I tried until the day it became impossible. The day I got my college acceptance letter was the first time in years I let myself hope. It wasn't just about getting into a good school. It was about escape. I had spent years walking on eggshells, trying not to step out of line, trying to be invisible enough that they wouldn't send me away, but present enough that my father might still remember I existed. But none of it mattered. The moment I saw my name on that acceptance letter, I knew I was done. I packed my bags, and for the first time in my life, I left that house without looking back. And my father, he barely noticed. For years, I convinced myself it was fine, that I was better off without them. I built a life on my own, brick by brick. I worked through college, took every extra shift I could get, made sure I was never in a position where I had to ask them for help, and when I graduated, I had nowhere to go. I had assumed, stupidly, that I could stay at my father's house just long enough to get on my feet, that maybe, just maybe, after all this time, I'd still have a place there. But when I called, Sharon answered. "Oh, honey," she said, voice laced with fake sympathy. "We gave your room to Amy. She needed the extra space. I'm sure you understand." And that was that. No argument, no discussion. I wasn't welcome. I never had been. I hung up the phone that day and made a promise to myself. I would never ask them for anything again. I would never let them hurt me again. I rented the cheapest apartment I could find, took the first job that would pay my bills, and started over. And then, just when I thought I was finally free, just when I had built something for myself, my grandmother died. She was the only one in my family who had ever truly loved me, and in her will, she left me everything she could. $150,000. With that, plus the years I had spent scraping and saving, I bought my own apartment. Mine. No mortgage, no debts, no strings. For the first time in my life, I had something no one could take away from me. Or so I thought. Because now, sitting in my father's living room, I watched as he, Sharon, and Amy tried to do exactly that. Tried to erase me again. Tried to take the one thing that was mine. But this time I wasn't going to let them. Silence stretched across the room, thick and suffocating. My father's threat still hung in the air. "If you don't give your apartment to Amy, you'll be cut out of the will." I should have been scared. Maybe, once upon a time, I would have been, but all I felt was rage. I let out a slow, measured breath, keeping my face neutral. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, but I refused to let them see it. I refused to give them even 1 second of satisfaction. I looked my father in the eye. "Cut me out." His jaw twitched. Sharon sucked in a sharp breath. "Ella, don't be so dramatic. This is family we're talking about." I almost laughed. Family. That word had never meant protection to me, never meant comfort or warmth. To them, family was just another word for power, for control. Sharon's nails tapped against the armrest, her expression shifting into something I recognized, something smug. "We're just asking you to do the right thing," she said, tilting her head. "You're older, Ella. You should want to help your sister." Amy had been silent this whole time, sprawled across the couch like she had better places to be. She hadn't even looked at me, because why should she? She knew this was already decided. She knew I wasn't supposed to have a choice. Finally, she set her phone down, letting out a long, exaggerated sigh. "You're making this such a big deal." I turned to her, my blood boiling. "You're trying to take my home, and I'm the one making this a big deal?" Amy blinked at me like I was speaking a different language. "You don't even need it," she said, voice dripping with entitlement. "You live alone. It's like a total waste of space." A waste of space? That was what my life was to them. That was what I was to them. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I paid for that apartment, I said, my voice deadly calm. I worked for years to afford it. I saved, I sacrificed. That's my name on the deed. And you think you can just, what, take it? Amy rolled her eyes. It's not like you'd be homeless or anything, she said. You can just get another place. Get another place. Like it was that simple. Like I hadn't spent half my life crawling out of the pit they had buried me in. Sharon let out a sharp sigh. Ella, enough! You're being childish. Childish. I turned my gaze back to her, my rage ice cold now. Childish, I repeated. You threw me away the second Amy was born. You made it very clear I wasn't part of this family, and now? Now you want something from me, and when I say no, I'm the one being Sharon's expression darkened. Watch your tone. Or what? I challenged. You'll kick me out of the family? Hate to break it to you, Sharon, but I've been out of this family since I was 9. Her lips pressed into a thin line. My father, who had been sitting in silence, finally spoke again. Ella, listen to me. I turned to him, waiting. His face was a carefully controlled mask, but I could see it, the irritation, the impatience. Like he thought this was just another tantrum, something I would eventually give into. You're the older sister, he said, his voice low and steady, like he was trying to be reasonable. This is what families do. They support each other. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Support each other? I repeated. Where was that support when I needed it? When I asked to come home after college and Sharon told me my room didn't exist anymore? When you let her treat me like I was nothing? My father exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. That's different, he said stiffly. No, I snapped. It's not different. You want me to give up everything for Amy, but she would never do the same for me, and you know it. Silence. Amy scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. God, you're so bitter. I whipped my head toward her. Bitter? You don't even want that apartment. You just want to take it because you can, because you've never had to work for a damn thing in your life and you think everything should be handed to you. Amy's mouth opened, then closed. I saw something flicker in her expression, just for a second. Guilt? No, she wasn't guilty. She was just annoyed that I wasn't playing along. Sharon sighed dramatically, standing up. This conversation is pointless, she said. Ella, if you don't do this, you're going to regret it. Your father has been more than generous with you, but we will cut you off. Completely. I laughed again, this time sharp and hollow. You can't cut off someone you've already abandoned. Sharon stiffened. My father finally lost his patience. Enough, he snapped, standing up as well. This isn't a debate, Ella. We've made our decision. It's time for you to do the right thing. I stood too, meeting his gaze head on. The right thing for who? I asked. Because it sure as hell isn't me. His nostrils flared. Amy smirked. Sharon folded her arms, waiting for me to cave, waiting for me to fall in line. For the first time in my life, I realized something. It had never been about love, not for them. I was a pawn to be moved, to be used, to be discarded when it suited them. And for years, I had let them, but not anymore. I exhaled slowly, letting the last bit of hope, the last thread that tied me to this so-called family, burn away. Then I picked up my bag, and I walked to the door. My father's voice followed me. If you leave now, don't expect us to help you ever again. I turned back, hand on the doorknob. I looked him in the eye. I never expected anything from you in the first place. And with that, I left. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I just walked out of that house, out of their lives. And finally, for the first time in my life, I was free. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until I stepped out into the cold night air. My father's house loomed behind me, suffocating, oppressive, filled with ghosts of a childhood I had spent years trying to forget. I was free, but somehow it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My breath came fast, shallow. My heart was still hammering from the confrontation, my father's voice replaying in my head. His threats, his disappointment. And yet, beneath all of that, there was something else. A whisper, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. They had expected me to cave. I could see it in the way they had sat there, so certain, so sure of themselves. Amy hadn't even pretended to ask nicely, because she didn't need to. It was never a request, it was an order. And when I refused, they weren't just angry, they were desperate. But why? Why had they acted like it was their right to take my home? Why did they think they could still control me after all this time? Something wasn't adding up. I turned the key in the ignition, but I didn't drive home. I needed answers, and I knew exactly who to ask. Jack answered on the second ring. My cousin. The only person in the family who had ever truly been on my side. Ella? His voice was groggy, laced with sleep. You okay? I hesitated. Are you home? Yeah, why? I need to talk to you. Something in my voice must have told him I wasn't in the mood for questions. Come over, he said immediately. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in Jack's kitchen, gripping a mug of coffee that I didn't even want. Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me closely. I had barely said a word since I arrived. My mind was still racing, pieces shifting, rearranging. I set the mug down, meeting his gaze. You were at Lorenzo's last night, right? Jack blinked. Yeah. Why? Who were you there with? He frowned. Just some guys from work, why? Did you see anyone you knew? Jack paused, his expression shifted. Slowly he straightened, his body going tense. Ella, he said carefully. What's going on? I swallowed. I think something's wrong. He studied me for a moment, then grabbed his phone off the counter. I wasn't gonna say anything, he muttered. Didn't know if it was my place. My stomach twisted. Jack, what are you talking about? He pulled up his photos and handed me his phone. I stared at the screen, and everything inside me went cold. It was a picture, taken from across the restaurant, slightly grainy but clear enough. Sharon, sitting at a booth in the dimly lit bar. But she wasn't alone. A man was sitting next to her, leaning in close. His hand rested lightly on hers, their heads tilted toward each other in an unmistakably intimate way. Then the next photo, them kissing. Not a peck, not an accident, a kiss. I stared at the images, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't recognize him at first, but then Jack swiped to another photo, one where I could actually see his face, and my world tilted. Robert Mitchell. The name popped into my head instantly, because I knew that name. I had heard it before. He worked at Riverside Insurance, the same company Sharon had worked at for over 20 years, the same company she had been at before she married my father. A sickening realization started to take shape. I swallowed hard. Jack, when was this taken? Last night, he said. She was all over him. I thought your dad and Sharon were having issues, but I barely heard the rest. My mind was spinning. This wasn't some new affair. This was something else, something bigger, something older. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Jack's eyes widened. Ella? I have to go. I barely remember driving home. My body was on autopilot, my thoughts a tangled mess. But by the time I stepped through my front door, I knew what I had to do. I grabbed a plastic bag from the kitchen, then another. The next morning, I showed up at my father's house without warning. I rang the doorbell, forcing my hands to stay steady. A moment later, the door opened. Sharon, she frowned, clearly not expecting me. Ella, where's Dad? She hesitated, but then stepped aside. Living room. I walked past her without another word. My father was sitting in his usual chair, reading the paper. He looked up, surprised. Ella? What are you doing here? I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the plastic bag from my pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. Inside were strands of Amy's hair collected from the brush in her bathroom, and beside it, strands from my father's comb. Sharon went still. My father frowned. What the hell is this? I want a DNA test, I said. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Then Sharon laughed. Laughed like I was some child throwing a tantrum. This is ridiculous, she said, shaking her head. My father's face darkened. Ella? I don't know what. Amy isn't yours. The words were like a gunshot in the quiet room. My father flinched. Sharon's laughter died instantly. I met her eyes. Is she? Her face drained of color, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I turned to my father, my voice eerily calm. I'm doing the test, I said, and when the results come back, you're going to realize that the woman you chose over your own daughter has been lying to you for 20 years. My father looked at Sharon, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Sharon's mouth opened, then closed. She was trapped. Because she knew? She had always known, and now, so did I. Silence, a thick, unbearable silence, stretched between us as I stared across the small cafe table at my father. I had just asked him the question that had been eating away at me since the moment I uncovered the truth. If Amy had really been your daughter, would anything have changed? He flinched, just barely, but he didn't answer. And that silence, that hesitation, that was my answer. I nodded slowly, feeling something inside me solidify. He wasn't here because he had finally realized how he had treated me. He wasn't here because he regretted the years of neglect, the birthdays forgotten, the holidays spent alone. He was here because his perfect family had fallen apart, and now, with nowhere else to turn, he was looking back at what he had thrown away. Me, I took a slow sip of my coffee, swallowing down the bitterness rising in my throat. "You only care now because the life you built was a lie," I said, my voice calm. "If Amy had really been yours, I'd still be nothing to you, just an afterthought." He opened his mouth, closed it again. I let out a breath, leaning back in my chair. "That's the difference between us. You lost everything because of a lie. I built everything I have because I accepted the truth." He stared down at his coffee, his hands tightening around the cup. "Ella, I don't know how to fix this. Fix this. Like it was something that could be patched up with a heartfelt apology. Like 20 years of neglect could be erased with one conversation." I shook my head, pushing my chair back. "You can't," I stood, grabbing my bag. For the first time, I felt free, not just from my father, not just from Sharon and Amy, but from the version of myself that had once wanted their love. The girl who had waited year after year for her father to see her. She was gone. And I wasn't looking back. I glanced at him one last time. "Take care of yourself, Dad." Then I walked out the door. And I never looked back. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. Sharon and Amy moved in with Robert Mitchell, the man who had been Amy's real father all along. Apparently, he hadn't been too thrilled about the revelation either. Word got out. Their entire social circle knew what had happened. Sharon, always so concerned with appearances, with keeping up the illusion of a perfect life, became a pariah overnight. Amy, she lost everything. The college fund my father had set aside for her, gone. The apartment she thought she could take from me, never hers to begin with. The luxury she had been raised in, thinking she was untouchable, it vanished, just like that. And my father, he was left in an empty house, surrounded by the wreckage of the life he had chosen over me. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt like I had won. But the truth, I didn't feel anything at all. Because by the time it all came crashing down, I had already moved on. Life felt different after that, lighter. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I focused on my job, my friendships, the people who had always been there for me, not out of obligation, but because they actually cared. My apartment was mine, and no one would ever take it from me. And my father, he reached out a few more times, hollow attempts to reconnect, but I had made my decision. I had spent too many years waiting for a father who never truly saw me. I wasn't going to waste any more time on a man who had only looked in my direction after losing everything else. And that's the thing about family. It's not about blood. It's about who shows up. And he never did, so I didn't either. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven him, given him another chance? Or would you have walked away, just like I did? Let me know your thoughts, because when it comes to family, sometimes the hardest choice is the only one we have left.